Part 1. The Creature of Greenland. A creature raised its head above a ship's mast. Another crossed the path of a Royal Navy vessel in clear daylight. The last was attacked with muskets and harpoons, and left parts of its body behind. These three encounters were recorded by sailors who claimed to witness something enormous beneath the waves. Our first account begins in the freezing waters of Greenland. July 6, 1734. It began with a shadow beneath our ship. Before anyone could identify it, the surface broke, and an enormous head rose from the water. It climbed higher than the railing, higher than the deck, then higher still until it appeared to reach beyond the crow's nest of our mainmast. My name is Hans Egede. For years I had travelled through Greenland as a missionary. I knew the animals inhabiting its waters. I had watched whales break through the ice, seen seals disappear beneath the waves, and listened to sailors describe strange creatures encountered far from land. But I had never seen anything like what surfaced beside us that day. The ocean had been calm that morning. Our ship moved steadily along Greenland's western coast, surrounded by grey water and distant mountains of ice. Then a sailor shouted. He was pointing towards a dark shape moving beneath the surface. The men rushed to the side of the ship. At first, there was nothing to see except the disturbance in the water. Then, the creature emerged. Its head appeared strangely small compared with the immense body following beneath it. A long, pointed snout faced forward, while thick, it was wrinkled with flesh which rose behind it. The creature released a powerful burst of water into the air. Several sailors stepped backwards. It breathed like a whale, but it did not resemble any whale we recognized. Large, broad limbs moved beside its body, pushing it through the freezing sea. Its surface appeared rough and uneven, almost as though parts of it were covered in shells. Yet, most of the animal remained hidden. We could only watch as the water shifted around a shape far larger than the section visible above it. The creature did not charge our vessel. It did not circle us. It simply began traveling alongside the ship, weirdly. For a moment, we moved together. The men remained pressed against the railing, watching the enormous body appear and disappear between the waves. Some whispered that it was a serpent. Others stood completely silent. Sailors often returned from long voyages with stories of monsters. They spoke of serpents stretching across the horizon, tentacles wrapping around ships, and islands that suddenly opened their eyes before sinking beneath the sea. Those stories were pretty easy to dismiss when they were told inside a tavern, you see. But this was different. Every man aboard could see it, not just one person. The longer we watched, the larger the creature appeared. Its body seemed almost as broad as the ship carrying us. Behind it, something long moved beneath the surface, extending farther than we could clearly follow, far longer than a whale's. Then the tail emerged. It stretched behind the creature until the animal appeared longer than our entire vessel. For several seconds, the sea around us seemed occupied by one continuous living body. But what we could see may have only been a fraction of it. The rest remained concealed in the darkness below. Then the creature began to descend. Its head lowered towards the surface. The thick, wrinkled body followed. Finally, the immense tail slipped beneath the water and vanished. Our sailors continued staring into the sea. Nobody knew whether it had left or whether it was now directly beneath us. The ship's timbers groaned softly as the waves pressed against the hull. Every dark shape below the surface seemed to move. We waited for the head to rise again, but it never did. Within moments, the ocean had returned to stillness. No blood floated to the surface. No fragment of the creature remained behind. There was nothing for us to prove what we had witnessed, except the men who had watched it disappear. I later recorded the encounter, describing it as a most terrible creature, something resembling nothing we had seen before. When the account reached Europe, artists attempted to recreate it. They tried to depict a picture of what we had been seeing. Their illustrations showed an enormous serpent arching over the water beside our ship, its body twisting through the ocean like a creature from an ancient map. But no drawing could show what remained hidden below us. Some believed the animal was an unknown species of whale. It had blown water from its head and possessed large fin-like limbs. Perhaps it had surfaced at an unusual angle, causing separate parts of his body to appear connected. Others suggested an enormous squid, a serpent, or something that had never been formally recorded. In the northern seas, sailors already had a name for the greatest creature believed to inhabit the depths. Its name was the Kraken. Tales described it as an animal so enormous that sailors could mistake its body for an island. It was said to remain in the deepest waters, rising only rarely before disappearing for generations and generations. Perhaps those legends grew from encounters like ours, a shadow moving beneath a ship, a body too large to understand from the surface, a creature visible for only a few moments before the ocean swallowed every trace of it. Whatever traveled beside us never attacked us. It did not need to. For the rest of the voyage, every sailor aboard the ship, all of us knew that something larger than our ship had been moving beneath the water, something that knew that it was obviously greater than us. And for the remainder of my life, I remembered the moment its head rose toward the top of our mast. More than a century later, officers aboard a British warship would report another impossible animal in the open sea. Unlike our creature, it would not disappear within moments. It would approach in clear daylight and remain visible long enough for the captain to study its face. Part 2. The Serpent of the Daedalus. August 6, 1848. The creature approached with its head raised 4 feet above the sea. Behind it, a dark body stretched across the surface for at least 60 feet. It possessed no visible fins. Its body did not twist or undulate, yet it was traveling directly towards a British warship at extraordinary speed. My name is Captain Peter McQuay. I commanded HMS Daedalus, a Royal Navy vessel returning to England after service in the East Indies. We had already rounded the Cape of Good Hope and we were sailing through the South Atlantic, hundreds of miles from the nearest mainland. The afternoon was clear. The sea was calm enough for an experienced sailor to distinguish a whale, a shark, or a floating wreckage without difficulty. Shortly before 5 o'clock, one of my officers suddenly called out from the deck. There was something approaching the ship. At first, only a dark shape could be seen cutting through the water. I believed it might be a whale, but as it moved closer, a head became visible above the surface, and then a neck. Long, narrow, and unlike that of any whale known to us. Several officers hurried to the side of the ship. One of them raised a telescope. Others stared with their naked eyes, dumbfounded, as the creature continued directly towards us. It did not dive, it did not change course. It came close enough for us to see its face. The head resembled that of a serpent. Its upper surface was dark brown, while the throat and lower jaw appeared pale, almost yellowish white. Something hung from the back of its neck. It looked like the mane of a horse or a mass of seaweed being washed across its body, but it traveled with the creature, holding onto it. Its eyes were dark and fixed ahead. Its mouth was large, though we could see no obvious teeth. The head remained approximately 4 feet above the water as it passed us. Had it belonged to a man I knew, I later wrote, I could have recognized his face at that distance without using a telescope. That was how close it came. Behind the head stretched an exposed body measuring at least 60 feet. Possibly more of the body remained beneath the surface. But that wasn't even the strangest thing. The strangest thing was how it moved. We saw no fins, no limbs. no tail rising behind it. The visible body did not bend from side to side like that of a swimming snake, nor did it rise and fall like a line of porpoises. It remained almost perfectly straight, and still the creature traveled at perhaps 12 to 15 miles per hour. It moved as though something hidden far below the surface were pulling it forward. The men stood silently along the deck as it crossed our path, and passed close beneath the lee quarter of the ship. Nobody fired, even though we had guns. There was little time to prepare a weapon, and none of us knew how the creature might react if struck. We were terrified. Our vessel was large. Whatever travelled beside it appeared entirely unconcerned. It did not care. It showed no fear of the hull towering above the water. It made no attempt to attack us, like it didn't need us. It simply continued along its chosen course, as though the Daedalus had entered its path rather than the other way around. For several moments its head remained close enough for every detail to be studied. Then the distance between us began to grow. I considered following it, but the creature travelled too close into the wind for our ship to pursue without losing considerable time. All we could really do was watch it move away, as the officers continued tracking it across the surface. As the creature travelled farther from us, its face disappeared first, then the pale throat. Soon only a dark head and its neck could be seen rising above the water. But it remained visible. Minute after minute, the serpent continued across the South Atlantic. It never breached like a whale, it never revealed the hidden section of its body, and it never produced the repeated splashes that would have exposed a group of smaller animals traveling together. It simply grew smaller in the distance. For nearly 20 minutes, we kept it in our sights, distracting us from the task at hand. Then the ocean swallowed it. The dark line disappeared among the waves, leaving nothing behind. No track we could follow, no fragment we could recover. Only the testimony of the men who had watched it pass. But those men were not inexperienced travelers, frightened by a distant shadow. They were Royal Navy officers and sailors accustomed to identifying the animals, objects, and illusions encountered at sea. The creature had appeared in clear daylight. It had passed close to the ship, and several witnesses had observed it from different positions on the deck. They had all seen the same impossible animal. One of my officers made a sketch while the details were still fresh in his mind. When the Daedalus returned to England, I submitted an official report to the Admiralty. I described the creature's head, colouring, and estimated length. I explained how it moved without any visible method of propulsion, and I recorded how closely it had approached our ship. Once the account reached the newspapers, the creature began to have a name across Britain. Illustrations showed the serpent passing beside the Daedalus, its long neck held above the water while officers watched from the deck. The report divided the public. Some believed trained naval officers had finally confirmed what sailors had reported for centuries. Others insisted we had mistaken an ordinary animal for a monster. Perhaps it was a large seal. Perhaps several porpoises had aligned in the water. Perhaps a whale had surfaced in a way that created the illusion of a serpent. But none of those suggestions resembled what we had witnessed. A seal did not possess 60 feet of exposed body. A line of porpoises would have repeatedly broken the surface. And no whale we knew travelled with a narrow, serpent-like head held 4 feet above the sea. I personally had no name for the creature. I could only describe what passed before us. Something alive, something enormous, and something not found in any natural history known to the officers aboard my ship. You see, the serpent was never captured. No body later washed ashore, no parts of its body either. No second vessel reported following it into the distance, and it crossed the path of the Daedalus once. No second vessel reported following it into the distance. It crossed the path of the Daedalus once, and disappeared into an ocean vast enough to conceal it forever. Perhaps this is why sea serpent accounts are so easily dismissed. The animals never remained at the surface. They offered only a few minutes of evidence before returning to depths no ship could search. A witness could describe the eyes, estimate the body, sketch the creature from memory. But without something physical, every encounter eventually became another story. 13 years later, a French warship would face the same problem. Its crew would encounter a creature so large and unnatural that few scientists would accept their description alone. But these sailors would not remain at the railing and watch it escape. They would load their muskets, prepare their harpoons, and attempt to drag the monster from the sea. Part 3. The Monster of the Electon. November 1861. The creature's body was the color of blood. It floated near the surface with enormous arms drifting around it, and two dark eyes watching from above the water. My name is Frederick Boyer. I commanded the Electon, a French naval vessel carrying 66 men towards Cayenne, in French Guiana. We were sailing near Tenerife when the lookout's cry reached the deck. "Large body on the surface!" I turned towards the water. In the distance, a reddish mass rose and fell between the waves. At first, it appeared to be wreckage, perhaps part of a damaged ship or the remains of a whale. I ordered the Electon to move closer. As the distance narrowed between us and the body, the shape became clearer. It was alive. The animal possessed a large, rounded body, unlike that of any whale or fish. Its wet flesh was dark red, almost brick-colored, and seemed to change shade whenever it rolled beneath the sunlight. Then we saw its eyes. They were enormous, dark, glassy, and visible from the deck of our ship. Long arms drifted around the creature, curling above and beneath the surface. They possessed no bones, yet each moved with a strange, deliberate motion. The men gathered along the railing, staring at it. Some whispered that it was a devil of the sea. Others believed the legendary kraken had finally risen before us. I had heard stories of creatures like this. Sailors claimed that enormous, many-armed animals inhabited the deepest waters. They were said to wrap themselves around ships, tear sailors from decks, and drag entire vessels beneath the sea. Naturalists generally dismissed those stories, however. Fragments of strange flesh had occasionally washed onto distant shores, but they were often too decomposed to identify. Few people accepted that an animal resembling an ordinary squid could grow large enough to threaten a vessel, a ship. Yet one was floating directly ahead of us. Its main body appeared to measure between 16 and 18 feet. That did not include the arms stretching through the water around it. If we returned with nothing but a description, our encounter would become another unbelievable sailor's tale like many before us. We needed proof, so I gave the order to capture it. The men loaded their muskets, the harpoons were brought onto the deck, and our sailors prepared heavy ropes and tied one into a large noose. As the Electon moved closer, the men took their positions along the side of the ship. No one knew how the creature would react. Its arms appeared long enough to reach farther than any of us wished to test. We were terrified, but determined. Eventually, the first musket fired, the shot striking the animal's body. But instead of penetrating deeply, the bullet seemed to lose its force against the soft, rubber-like flesh. Another musket fired, and then another. Smoke rolled across the deck as the sailors continued shooting into the red mass. The creature began to move, its arms tightening and twisting around its body. Water churned across the surface as the enormous eyes disappeared beneath it, and then the animal sank. Our sailors rushed to the railing. Seconds earlier, the creature had been directly before us. Now, nothing remained except disturbed water, slowly going back into its previous place. Every man stared into the darkness below. It could have fled into the depths, or it could have been beneath the hull, reaching through water none of us could see. The men tightened their grip on their weapons. Then someone shouted. The red body had resurfaced farther away. It was still alive. I ordered the helmsman to follow it. The electron turned towards the creature as sailors prepared to fire again. The squid attempted to move away, but our ship continued closing the distance. We were not going to let it escape. More shots struck its flesh. Harpoons were thrown from the deck. Some glanced away without gaining any hold. Others pierced the creature briefly, only to tear free as it twisted beneath the waves. Its body was simply too soft. Every weapon capable of entering its flesh also ripped through it. You see, when the harpoons went inside, the creature would twist and the harpoons would rip out. This was no normal creature. Again, the creature sank. Again, the men waited, and once more, the red mass rose to the surface. Our pursuit continued, and our ship circled the animal while sailors ran across the deck carrying ammunition, ropes, and harpoons. Musket smoke mixed with the sea air. Men shouted whenever one of its arms emerged from the water. Yet the creature refused to die. The bullets caused little visible damage. The harpoons could pierce it. They could go deep. However, none remained secure enough to hold its enormous weight. If we tried to lift it with the harpoons alone, they would come back and tear directly through its body. We needed another way. The sailors brought forward the rope, which was tied into a noose earlier. The rope was lowered as we moved alongside the creature again. Several of our men waited for its body to rise close enough to the ship, and then they threw the rope. The loop landed across the squid. For a moment it slid over the wet flesh and appeared certain to fall in the sea. We were slowly losing hope. But then a miracle hit. The rope caught around the rear of its body. "Pull!" the sailors yelled. We had seized the line. The noose had tightened. For the first time, the animal could not disappear. Its arms churned through the water as the crew drew it towards the side of the electron. More men joined the rope. Together, they began hauling the creature from the sea. Slowly, its enormous body rose. Water poured from its flesh, its arms twisting beneath it, while the dark eyes faced the men pulling from above. For a moment, it appeared that we had succeeded. We were about to bring a living legend onto the deck. Then the rope began cutting into it. The squid's weight was too great. Its soft body could not support itself outside of the water. The noose was tightening like a blade. The flesh began to tear, and the sailors shouted. But there was no time to release the tension. A section of the creature separated completely. The rope snapped backwards, and a lot of our sailors lost their footing, falling across the deck, losing control. The remaining body struck the water and immediately began sinking. Its arms disappeared first, then its enormous head. For one final moment, the dark eyes remained visible beneath the surface. Then the red shape faded into the depths. This time it did not return. Our sailors gathered along the railing, watching the place where the creature had vanished. After everything we had fired into it, the ocean had reclaimed almost the entire animal, but not all of it. The rope still held a torn section of flesh. I ordered the sailors to drag it on the deck, and the recovered fragment weighed approximately 30 pounds. It could be touched, measured, preserved. This was no distant shadow glimpsed through fog. It was not seaweed, wreckage, or a group of animals mistaken for one. Whatever had surfaced beside the electron, part of it now lay on our deck. We ended up bringing the fragment to Tenerife and reported the encounter to the French authorities. Descriptions and drawings were later produced from what the officers had witnessed, and some people still struggled to accept that an animal of such size could exist. It seemed to belong among the monsters painted on old maps, not within the ordered world of modern science. But the ocean didn't care what humanity believed was possible. Our crew had pursued one of those monsters. They had struck it with bullets and harpoons. We had nearly dragged it aboard, and although most of the creature escaped, it left behind something the early encounters before us never could. Evidence. Hans Egede had watched an unknown creature vanish near Greenland. The officers of HMS Daedalus had seen a serpent cross the South Atlantic, but the sailors aboard the Electron returned carrying part of what they encountered. And what happened after that fragment reached land would change how the world viewed the monsters of the sea. Part 4. What remains beneath the waves? You see, the fragment recovered by the Electron was taken ashore. Commander Boyer's report reached France, accompanied by drawings based on what his officers had witnessed. The creature was eventually recognized as a giant squid, an animal that many people had previously regarded as little more than a sailor's myth. Then, more bodies appeared. During the following decades, giant squid washed onto distant coastlines, including several specimens found in Newfoundland, just off the northeast coast of Canada. Scientists could finally examine animals large enough to explain at least some of the stories told at sea. The kraken had not been discovered exactly as the legends described it. It was not an island-sized monster capable of swallowing entire ships, but the animal behind those stories was real. A giant squid could possess eyes larger than dinner plates, arms lined with powerful suckers, and a body extending farther than the length of a room. It lived in depths almost completely inaccessible to the sailors who passed above it. The Electron encounter soon helped inspire another version of the monster. In Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, giant squid rise from the darkness and attack Captain Nemo's submarine. The story exaggerated their violence, but it did not invent the creature. The fate of the other two encounters was less certain. Researchers later suggested that Hans Egede may have witnessed a whale surfacing at an unusual angle. The animal reportedly blew water into the air and possessed broad, fin-like limbs. But Egede had seen whales before. Whatever surfaced near Greenland appeared unfamiliar enough for him to describe it as a creature resembling nothing they had ever witnessed. The serpent of HMS Daedalus created an even greater controversy. Naturalist Richard Owen claimed that the officers had probably seen an elephant seal, which disturbed water behind it, creating the illusion of a long body. Captain McQuay rejected the explanation. He maintained that a seal could not account for the serpent-like head, pale throat, and 60 feet of body observed by several trained sailors. He never withdrew his report. Neither did the officers who stood beside him. We cannot know exactly what every witness saw, but the confirmed existence of the giant squid makes one fact difficult to ignore. Sometimes sailors returned with stories of monsters because they had genuinely encountered animals the rest of the world did not yet understand. The ocean is large enough to hide entire mountain ranges beneath its surface. Its deepest regions exist in permanent darkness, under pressure powerful enough to crush an unprotected human body. Creatures can live and die there without ever being seen by us. For centuries, the giant squid was one of those creatures. Perhaps Egede witnessed an unfamiliar whale, and perhaps the crew of the Daedalus saw a known animal from an impossible angle. Or perhaps both ships crossed paths with creatures that rarely approached the surface, and returned to waters no sailor could follow. 3 crews claimed to witness something enormous. One watched a creature rise above the height of its mast. Another observed a serpent's face in clear daylight. And the last attacked the monster with muskets and harpoons before dragging parts of its body onto the deck. Only one of those creatures was eventually given a name. The others disappeared beneath the waves. Old maps once warned sailors that monsters waited beyond the known world. Today, those empty spaces have been measured and colored blue. But mapping the surface is not the same as knowing what lives beneath it. And somewhere below the ships crossing the ocean tonight, something may be moving through the darkness, waiting for the rare moment when it rises close enough to be seen. Thank you for listening. Let me know which encounter you found the most convincing down in the comments. And if you'd like to explore more forgotten accounts, unexplained creatures, and dark moments from history, subscribe to the Dark Mystic Archive. Until next time, remember that the ocean keeps its secrets well hidden.